friends, I am Leighellen and this is Momma Leighellens Book Nook. Today I am super excited because we will be joined by Jane Healey, who is one of my beloved historical fiction authors. She is the author of The Secret Stealers, which we read for book club last year. And this year we got a chance to read Good Night from Paris, and she sat down with our book club and shared a fabulous presentation. So check this out. So, hello everyone. Welcome to our discussion tonight with author Jane Healey. I'm so excited. Hello, Jane. Welcome.
Hello.
Jane, as you know, is the author of several of some of our favorite books. Secret Stealers we did just last year, I think, or maybe was it 2 years? It's all a blur.
Yeah.
And now we get to have you on for Good Night from Paris. So welcome, Jane.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. As you said, I have a presentation tonight, and I just heard that most of you have read the book, which is awesome. I always love talking spoilers and things like that. But this presentation is really the history behind the story, and might answer some of your questions, probably not all of them. But so I'll go through this, and then Leighellen, the plan is to take questions at the after.
Yeah, I've got some questions for you. They've got some questions for you. They're all muted right now, but as they have a question, we'll just unmute them. And then everyone, just let me know. There's a chat bar. If you want to see the chat bar, click chat and it brings the bar up. So you can just say like, I've got a question, and we'll make sure to circle back around to you when we're done. But for now, Jane, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Leighellen. And thank you for reading. I was so thrilled that you guys picked this book. I'm just, so grateful. So let me jump right into the presentation and share my screen. So before I jump into the history behind the story, I want to share a story from 2020, which I think kind of is representative of why I decided to write about Drew Leighton Tartiere. This is Fraim. He's a local Canadian veteran. He received the National Order of the Legion of Honor from France for his time as a bomber pilot for the Royal Canadian Armed Forces in France during the Second World War. So he was in his 90s. This was in February 2020. And this is when they honored him in Ottawa.
At the age of 20 and on his 13th mission, his plane was attacked by German night fighters. His plane was shot down on the edge of the Fontainebleau forest south of Paris. As he fought to control the descending plane, he ordered his crew to evacuate. He was the last person out of the plane. After walking all night, Mr. Fraim found himself in the village of Barbizon. There he came into contact with an American woman by the name of Drew Tartiere.
Wow.
Tartiere spent the war years assisting the French underground. As she spoke English, Mr. Fraim was able to convince her that he was a member of the Allied forces and not a German soldier. Mrs. Tartiere hid Mr. Fraim in the back of her house, where he was eventually joined by members of his crew. They stayed hidden for 7 weeks until Barbizon was liberated in August 1944. As benefits a true hero, Mr. Fraim minimizes his contributions and sacrifices. To this day, he praises the women and men of the French underground, and in particular, Drew Tartiere.
So it's interesting. This is Lauren again. And one of my primary sources for the book, I have had a lot of different sources, but one of them was this tiny autobiography that Drew wrote right after the war. It's out of print. My copy is tattered. I bought it off a guy on eBay in the UK for like way too much money. And but it has some photos in the middle of it. And one of the photos is when France is liberated, and this is Drew and Lauren at a liberation luncheon at the very end of the war with another guy, Lieutenant Charles Whipple, Bill Watson, and then this is an action shot of Andy the dog. He's kind of a blur. And I'll talk a little more about the pictures later.
Okay.
But I'm going to talk about how I first learned about Drew Leighton Tartiere, why this story, history behind the story, and then I can't wait for your questions at the end.
Great.
Thank you. So this is a little bit about me. I think you all know like my books pretty well, I think, but I always put this at the beginning just to kind of give, if people haven't heard of my books. I left high tech 20 years ago and started freelance writing when my girls were little. They're 16 and 19 now. And that was the first time I was like, I'd always wanted to write novels, but you have kids, and I think that was like a turning point for me. Like, okay, well, when are you going to take this seriously? When are you going to actually start writing fiction, since you've talked about it for like years and years? So I started working in the fringes of my life on fiction projects. And I had a little writers group of women that I'm still friends with from Boston Magazine. And I'd written an article about this pottery, the Saturday Evening Girls Club pottery. And it was a group of immigrant women in Boston's North End at the turn of the 20th century. And I thought that would be a great idea for a novel. And because I'm a decent writer, I thought it would not be that hard, but it took me about 10 years. So
you're more than a decent writer, let's be honest.
A little harder than I thought. And then, the first time out in 2015 or so, maybe 2014, I tried to get it published, and I stopped counting at like 62 rejections or something, which was crazy. And I put it aside. And then 2017, I think luck and timing matter, and publishing immigrant stories were having a moment, and that definitely helped. And so after that, always wanted to write a war story, big story. My grandfather was in World War II on the Navy ships off the coast as a firefighter off the coast of Africa and Europe. And so I heard about these Red Cross Clubmobile girls who were at the front lines of the war. And that is what the Beantown Girls is based on, their history, their true stories. And that came out in 2019. Oh, thank you. That came out in 2019. And then my mid-pandemic book came out in 2021, as you know, and that's based on the women of the OSS, the precursor to the CIA in World War II, including Julia Child, who I love. So that is it in a nutshell. So I honestly, you all are big readers, and you know how World War II fiction as a subgenre of historical fiction is very crowded. And I really wasn't intending on writing another World War II book, to be honest. But when I was researching The Secret Stealers, Drew surfaced in multiple sources, actually, because she was one of several thousand expatriates, American expatriates, who chose to stay in France. And one of the two, like the kind of vignette that I read about in a couple different sources was this story of after Pearl Harbor, how the Germans had rounded up a couple hundred American women living in and around Paris, and Drew was one of them. And they put them on a bus. They brought them to, as you know, if you read it, they brought them to a zoo, and they imprisoned them in the monkey house, and then another camp from there. And so I read about this, and I was like, I can't even believe this happened to American women, and I never heard about it before. It's so bizarre. And I had like reading not just Drew's account of those days, but also other people's. It had these elements of comedy and tragedy and everything in between. And I'm like, I just have to try to write a story around this. And then the more I dug into Drew's life and history during the war, the more I realized like that was who I wanted to like write the story around.
Right.
And it's like with all of these books, like this is my fourth book, and it's like that feeling, the hair goes up on the back of your neck, and you're like, why have I not heard of this? Why haven't I heard of this woman?
I feel like I said that like at least 5 times while reading this. Like, how did I not know about this? This is so ridiculous. I can't believe it's true.
It really is stranger than fiction. And so, I pitched it to my editors because I'm like, I just have to try. And thankfully they said yes. And so this is a departure for me because it's biographical fiction, which was very challenging in certain ways because you have pretty kind of, I feel, stricter parameters for the story. So who was Drew? She was born Dorothy Elizabeth Blackman in 1903 in Kenosha, Wisconsin. She lived in Mexico with her family. Then she was educated in Switzerland at a boarding school. They were pretty well-to-do, her family. This is her brother in this picture. At 19, she got married to a guy who was like 34 years old. They had one son. It was a failed marriage almost from the start. And she left her husband and son to fulfill her dream of acting in Hollywood in the 30s. So she left them behind, and she went to Hollywood, and worked really hard and was a rising star. This is one of her pictures from her Hollywood days. And these are some of the first movies she was in. Yeah, she was stunning. She kind of had the look of the time, you know what I mean? That 30s like glamour. This is from one of the Charlie Chan films, which she became known for. And these two pictures,
Greta Garbo.
yeah, she was compared to Greta Garbo. These are, this one is an ad, and I love this 1930s ad because the copy in the below, Drew Leighton, a beauty whose eyes are alive, fresh, and sparkling, and kept that way with proper care. Like, it's so like, where are your eye cream, ladies? And I just love the picture of her there too. This is a great picture too. She was pretty feisty and had a strong personality, and I think that's what it took in Hollywood back then. And I mean, this is a little story of how she just told her director one day, I'm taking the day off and taking my hairdressers to lunch and to get their fortunes told. And I'm sure they weren't happy with her, but she did. She just left. So I thought that was pretty funny. And then this is really funny. So she had this beloved Doberman. I don't know his name. She was a big dog lover, clearly. And he would terrorize people on the set. But she loved him. I have her scrapbooks. I'll get into that later. There's more pictures of this Doberman than her family in these scrapbooks. And it says Drew Leighton and her prize-winning Great Dane, on which he has taken out $20,000 bite insurance after he got tough with Charlie Chan. Like, he literally was biting people on the movie sets.
$1 million today.
Yeah, exactly. $20,000 in 1935 was a lot of money. So yeah, crazy. So this is one of her pictures from her Charlie Chan years, and I think a clip is coming up. She was in at least 3, I think possibly 4 Charlie Chan films. I got to look this up again. And at this point, like, really a star on the rise in Hollywood, really kind of making a name for herself. This is one of the posters. So she's on the poster. Her name's listed under Charlie Chan, which was played by Warner Oland, which would not be acceptable today. It's really like kind of ridiculous, but that's 1930s. What can you say? Here's a clip from the movie.
Mr. Chan, have you seen Leigh?
Yes.
What did he say? What did he find out?
Nothing. He is dead.
What?
I just like that. It cracks me up. So her star's rising. She goes to Broadway to perform in a couple plays and gets rave reviews there. When she's on Broadway, she meets a French up-and-coming actor named Jacques Tartier. And this is another picture of him. They meet in 1937. And it's a whirlwind romance. They fall head over heels in love. She goes to the West End, performs in the West End in a couple plays. They get married and move to Paris in 1938. And I've done this presentation a couple times, and the other morning I did it for a group, like a women's group, and one of the ladies in the audience is like, I'd run away to Paris with him. And I'm like, yeah, you would. Look at him. Very handsome, dreamy looking Jacques. So she leaves it all behind. And of course, then the war starts. Oh, and this is one of the only pictures I've seen of them together. There's no wedding photos, nothing. This is the only one we could find of Drew and Jacques together.
Wow.
Yeah. So he goes off to war, and she's left in Paris alone, as you know. And she had, her family really begged her to leave, and he did too. They were like, get out of Europe, get out of France while you can, and kind of shelter in the US, and then you can come back after the war. And she refused. So, and she did have a large network of friends and expatriates, Parisians that she was close with, and she became very close with Nadine, her housekeeper. This is a picture of the real Nadine.
I loved their friendship.
Yeah, me too. They were like sisters. They really were. So then, she is offered this job as the voice of, essentially the first voice of America for Paris Mondial, Radio Mondial, which was kind of operated by the French Ministry of Information. And, at the time, America was very isolationist and very weary of war. They wanted nothing to do with what was going on in Europe. And so she was trying to convince them through all sorts of programming, and especially pulling in journalists who are on the ground like Dorothy Thompson to try to sway American opinion about this. And then, of course, the Germans announced she's going to be executed when they occupy the country, and they announced that on Berlin radio many times. And she kept broadcasting, of course, until Paris fell in 1940. And they flee Radio Mondial. The whole caravan flees. She later finds a villa in Barbizon and decides she needs to lay low and go by Tartier from now on, hoping that the Germans will never realize that Drew Leighton from the radio is Drew Tartier, who married Jacques. This is just to step back in terms of history, just to give you a sense.
This is so helpful.
Yeah, just to give you context. So, the Germans occupy France in 1940, and this is the area they occupied, including, of course, all the coast. It was 3/5 of the mainland of France. And then this was the so-called free zone in the south, which was governed by a French government in Vichy France. But really, from the very start, it was a puppet government. It was kind of a joke. They were really capitulating to the Germans from the beginning, Marshal Pétain and others. And then by 1942, Germany had occupied all of France. These pictures are pretty famous. June 13th, Parisians go to bed and they wake up next morning to a German accented voice saying curfew is imposed, and the city was occupied by that evening. And many people had fled by then. These pictures are famous because Hitler only visited Paris like once during the war.
Really?
Yeah, he wasn't there. He really didn't go there. I think only one time. That's why there's not many pictures of him there. And then these pictures were considered propaganda by the Germans because it kind of makes it look like things are okay in Paris. These are pictures of, and because everyone's walking around, there's German soldiers going about their lives. Of course, there's Nazi flags everywhere. And then there was German signs on every corner. And one of the small acts of resistance teenagers would do is they'd switch the arrows to different places so that the Germans would get lost, which I thought was kind of funny. And of course, there was no petrol, no gas for Parisians. So there was lots of bikes and horse and buggies and all sorts of contraptions. So Drew goes to Barbizon to kind of lay low. And then Jean, as you know, joins her there because he starts getting involved in the resistance and he's recovering from being sick. So she goes to the village of Barbizon. She knew it from Jacques before. This is Villa Squirrel. It can be rented on Airbnb for $107 a night.
Shut up.
Which is so wild. I know.
I'm writing this down for when we take a book tour.
Honestly, there were Germans everywhere in the village. As you know from the story, this is the front of it, but the layout's kind of deceiving because it had this courtyard in the back and these other little cottages, which became important. So Nadine and Drew start growing vegetables in the courtyard and have all these animals to help to bring food back to Paris because food was getting harder and harder to come by in Paris. So this is interesting. This is Villa Squirrel, and one of those this is weird coincidental kind of eerie stories. My husband lived in France for a while. He likes art, and he bought a couple of antique prints, black and white prints of in France. I don't think he bought them in France. I think he brought them around here, and they're in our hallway. And so when I was researching Barbizon and looking at photos of the house and trying to understand the sense of it, I was like, well, I don't know why this looks familiar to me, but it kind of does. But then maybe it just looks like all villages. But then I realized it's on my wall, which is so crazy.
That is crazy.
I never even read that this was Barbizon until I'm like, honey, I think that's our street. And she's like, I think that's her house. So crazy.
Wow, you were meant to write this book.
It was the weirdest thing because I've looked at this picture for a decade and I'm like, I can't believe it. Yeah, crazy. This is one of the pictures of her with one of her elderly neighbors in Barbizon.
Oh.
This is the farm that she decides to lease outside of the city so they can grow more food, so Jean can start doing more resistance activities. And I feel like I thought of this part as like kind of the calm before the storm for Drew. She's able to evade the Germans even though they're everywhere, hiding in plain sight as Drew Tartier. And then of course, after Pearl Harbor, the arrests start. And I'm gonna just close this a little so I can see. Okay. And the zoo scene happens. So she's arrested and put on the bus with several hundred other American women. She's at first terrified that they know who she is, but then when they arrest her neighbor who's in her 60s, who's never done anything and lived there for years, she's hoping that she's safe. So from the zoo in Paris, they're there for a few days, and then they're moved to the Vittel prison camp. But as you know, if you read the story, it was not the horrific conditions of some of the concentration camps because it was monitored by the International Red Cross. So this is interesting. This is in her autobiography. This is her papers after she faked illness in Vittel. They released her thinking that she was dying, basically. And they give her these papers, and basically, she has to report to 84 Avenue Foch, the head of the Gestapo in Paris, on a regular basis. But she was really she was free to go back and forth to Barbizon and from Barbizon to Paris all the time. And that was unheard of, for French people, for Americans.
And how far away, like what is the distance?
Yeah, so it's 90 minutes by train. It's about 90 minutes by train. Oh. And if you read this, they're just she's dismissed from the camp. She can return to her former residence. She'll be subject to report regularly, but all officials are requested to permit the aforementioned to make her return journey unhindered and afford her their help and protection. Wow. So she could go back and forth, and the Germans had to let her. So this certificate entitles the holder to free transportation to her home. So that was really, for someone who was going to be involved with the resistance, that turned out to be like a golden ticket.
A golden ticket, yeah.
Yeah. So at first, she's very sick, and the Germans think she's dying, and she, Dominic and others want to get her to get back involved in the resistance, and she's just doesn't think she has the strength or she can't do it. But then, when Allied planes start crashing and all our neighbors start knocking on the door about Americans or Canadians or British in haystacks and apple trees and, falling all over the area. Yeah. And she sees these young guys, and they're terrified and they can't speak the language and they're injured. She knows she has to get involved. So she helps the underground network in large ways and small ways. She helps provide food for the families hiding aviators in Paris and beyond. She helps as a translator, and she directly aids in the escape of many British, American, and Canadian flyers, including, as it said in the video at the beginning, hiding 5 of them at the end of the war, her and Nadine. So when France is liberated in 1944, the village has a party to celebrate the end of the war and thank these Allied flyers, as well as Drew and Nadine. And she had overseen the escape of at least 32 American, British, and Canadian flyers and assisted in helping over 100 others. And so this is a better shot of that picture.
Oh, yeah.
So good. And so this is one of the many parties they all had at the end of the war, when Barbizon was liberated.
Wow. So
after the war, she wrote this little autobiography and took a tour of the US. She also received a lot of honors and awards from the different governments. Oh, did my picture go out? It's going to come back.
I see it.
Okay, good. So yeah, she toured around, and she was reunited with some of the guys that stayed in her house and some of the other flyers. This is Lauren Fraim again from the beginning.
Oh, that's incredible.
And she after the war, she was really honored, and lots of articles about her I've found on newspapers.com and elsewhere. But since then, I think she's kind of been forgotten, which is remarkable given her story.
Her story's amazing.
Story's amazing. Yeah.
truly incredible. And
It
especially with
really
the amount
is.
of historical fiction novels that are about this generation, I am just shocked that I'd never heard of her before.
Right. I mean, and you know how, like, yeah, there's like a book a day coming out in World War II right now, so it's crazy. So yeah, yeah, this is another one of the
Oh, these are
reunion.
great.
I love it. So yeah, so I mean, I wanted to write you see why I wanted to write about her. She was like
Oh,
this
amazing.
hero that's been forgotten, I think, and I love writing about lesser known women in history. So I do want to talk about a couple of the other women in the story that are real women in real life, including
Oh,
Dorothy
good.
Thompson.
Yes, we were so curious about her too.
She was incredible, and
You could write a whole story on her.
you really could. And I mean, like, she was a celebrated international journalist and one of the only women in the field, really, at the time. And her beat was she lived in Germany in the 30s and was one of the only ones to ever interview Hitler. She saw everything coming.
And
She
she
had
just
this
seemed unafraid, just a strong, bold
unafraid,
woman.
so bold, and she predicted it to a detail, like what was happening, and that Americans' involvement was inevitable. And so the part of the radio era of Drew's life in the book is really a black box. The recordings from what I've read were destroyed. There's no transcripts of it, so that part I had to really kind of
That's so heartbreaking.
yeah, I know.
Really.
I was surprised. And
Especially in
so
this day and age of like podcasts being popular again, like it seems like something like that would be able to be like, we're gonna, refresh these and send them out in the world again or something.
and it's possible they'll turn up, but from the sources I could find, there's like they're nowhere. And so I had to kind of fill in this black box, but I knew that Dorothy Thompson had been on the show a number of times. I knew that Josephine Baker had been on at least a couple times, and I thought she was such a remarkable character in history, and is still worshipped and adored in France to this day. And I don't go into her resistance work, but she smuggled intelligence in her sheet music because she could get in another country because she was so famous and an entertainer. So I loved her. Love Sylvia Beach. Obviously owner of Shakespeare and Company.
What's not to love about a bookstore owner?
I know. And yeah, dear friend of Ernest Hemingway. In prison with Drew in the zoo, and then she was in prison in Vittel, and I read some of her letters from that time, and she got really depressed because Drew got out, and other friends were able to get out through family, friends, whatever, and Sylvia's family and friends were trying to get her out for months, but she was in there for several months after Drew was let go, and she was quite depressed, and not, obviously it's just horrible. So what happened to her after the war?
That's what we all want to know. We all want to
Yeah.
know what happened to Drew. And I just want you to know, one of the fabulous things about this book was how we all totally nerded out and ended up going down Google rabbit holes. Like every one of us had a story of like the hours they spent afterwards.
Oh,
Googling.
I love it. That's so great. Yeah, thank you.
I always feel like that's the sign of a really good historical fiction novel.
Thank you. Yeah. So, and I meant to say about the scrapbook. So when I had finished the manuscript, I was like, my husband actually was like, you really need to find out if she has any family alive, because, if it was your grandfather or grandmother, you'd want to know. And we found her grandson on Ancestry.com. And through that, we found her granddaughter, Tracy. And Tracy had these scrapbooks that she sent out to us and let us scan. And so a lot of these pictures are from Drew's scrapbooks.
That's
which is
awesome.
Amazing. Yeah, so amazing. And so she she tours the country, America. She reunites with Allied flyers she saved. But she said, Paris is my home now. And she lived in Paris. She married Jeffrey Parsons, this guy. He was head of the Boston Globe for a while, and then he was head of the International Tribune in Paris. And that's how they met. And then in her later years, she moved back to California, where she was originally living before the war. And but yeah, she lived in France for quite a while. Oh, this is just a little aside because people seem to like
The
talking about
cover is stunning.
Thank you. So
So
this
stunning.
was a tough cover. Like I'm usually on the exact same page with my editor Alicia. She's amazing. And but this one I was like really nervous that they were going to send me concepts. I had given them a bunch of ideas. I had I had a Pinterest page, like all this stuff. And I knew kind of knew kind of what I wanted. I'm not a designer. I'm not artistic in that way at all. But I had said to my husband the night before, I'm like, I just don't, I want anything but a big fat Eiffel Tower on the cover because there's so many Eiffel Tower books. Like I don't want an Eiffel Tower. Please just like, I know what I want, like enough with the Eiffel Tower books, they're everywhere. And this is the first round of concepts they sent me. So I was like, it's not what I wanted. So
Oh gosh, that's so funny. Here's your giant Eiffel Tower.
I really like those are my exact words. I'm like, come on. And Alicia was crushed because she loved them. And this is just
lovely, but it's not about her. I mean, it's about her. So she's not even on these covers.
This is not the vibe I was going for. And I thought it looked very generic and also, but apparently Eiffel Towers really sell books. Who knew, right? So they do. And so they sent me another round of concepts after going back and forth because I felt strongly that she's a real person in history and she should be on the cover, right? And so but there's one like that looks kind of like this, and that's why I ended up not and then this one, this is a radio, and I just couldn't even tell.
It looks like a taxi cab.
Yeah, I was like, what is going on? And
she's hailing a taxi in Paris.
Oh yeah, and then I loved this one, and
I love the radio wave.
Yeah,
I think it's so subtle.
I love that we tweaked it, and they also stuck a little Eiffel Tower.
They did. Oh, right. It's not in the original. Oh, that's funny. They're like, we need the Eiffel Tower.
We need the Eiffel Tower. So,
that's always fun for us to see how these things come together.
Yeah. I think people like the inside process. You know what I mean? Like the behind the scenes. So,
sure.
Leighellen, you know all this. This is what I say at the end of my talks in libraries and stuff, but like word of mouth is the best marketing. So like my editors always say you can do all the social media in the world, but word of mouth, word of mouth, word of mouth. Like, and so if you like a book, tell your friends, tell your book clubs, tell your libraries and your bookstores, and
post about it, share about it.
Yeah, exactly. Like social media, word of mouth. And I do have a mailing list just for like invitations to upcoming things. Like I do a historical happy hour where I interview authors once a month. I'm doing Alka Joshi, who I love, who wrote The Henna Artist, April 17th.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I have to send out the invite. I'm doing that tomorrow. And then and I have I turn the webinars, they're called Historical Happy Hour, into podcast and YouTube videos afterwards. So you can see all the old ones on that. And and if you are online and write reviews online, if you could do that too, that would be amazing. So so that is it. Thank you so much. And I'm going to stop share.
That was fantastic.
Thank you.
All right, friends, I'm going to kick off some questions, but if you have questions, make sure you let me know in the chat, and then I will call on you, and then we will unmute you. The first thing I'm dying to talk to you about is your choice of the way that you wrote this. So historical fiction has a lot of history of, dual timeline, dual narrative. And what I thought was really unique about this book, and we talked about it in our group discussion, was this was, a single point of view and pretty linear, So tell us about that decision.
That's a great question. And I when I was first mapping it out and trying to figure out how to write it, I was concerned about writing it in the first person because this was a real person, but I did have her autobiography. I also had a number of her letters home they're archived at the Holocaust Museum. They're in digital format in DC. So that gave me at least a sense of her voice. And I asked myself, like, am I being, am I just being too safe or lazy, like not writing it from dual point of view, or, but it really felt like This was one woman's story.
Mm.
I didn't want to jump back and forth in time because I'm not a huge fan of that unless it's done really, really well. And I think I wanted people to feel in the moment with her, when they read it.
I think the other thing that was amazing was it goes from 39, I think is when it starts, all the way to 1944. And
Yeah.
that's a big chunk of time. And yet, it's a fairly chunky book. I mean, it is over 400 pages, but I never felt like it was chunky. Does that make sense? Like it was
No, it does. Thank
it
you.
was
Yeah.
very the way that you wrote it was very immersive, and so I just wanted to know, I think Pam said it in our chat, I just wanted to know who survived. I wanted to know what happened. So
Right.
reading and you're just fully immersed. Like, did you have an idea of kind of the time frame you wanted to narrow it down to?
Yeah, I mean, and this one is it's the longest time, span of time I've written.
Yeah.
So that was a little scary, but I really wanted to, I knew the ending was going to be bittersweet because her life was bittersweet at that time, but I wanted to end it on an up note. And I loved those pictures in the courtyard and that whole feeling of like all of Paris like breathing a sigh of relief. You know what I mean? Like it's over. And the guys celebrating and all. I love that feeling. I wanted to end it there. So I just had to kind of feel like, where can I jump time where that feels kind of natural and authentic and won't take away from the story,
But yeah, we needed some of the beginning, right, to kind of
Right.
build to where her character growth from her being,
Yeah.
this Hollywood starlet to being this amazing resistance worker.
Yeah. And I think that her radio days were really interesting. It wasn't something I knew much about either. So I thought like I wanted to include that and kind of her, yeah, like you said, her evolution from like she had like a pretty good pampered life before the war. Like she was,
Right.
she did all right. And so I mean the fact that she had this in her was really interesting to me, that she had this kind of strength and stubbornness and courage, to do all these things.
Right. Against the Nazis who literally
Yeah.
killed people in the street. And,
Yeah.
even
Hmm.
at the end, you brought in some of the things that we've known and read from other books of like, the women at the end who had their heads shaved or were dragged out in the street. And,
Yeah.
so you
Yes.
knew that at some point that could be her. So you're reading this with just this foreboding, and she still chooses to continue to
Yeah.
do what she can to resist, even when it's just in the form of gardening, growing food and bringing people food or bringing clothes, or you kind of see her growth.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, we
Thank
were
you.
going to ask you about the ending, but you kind of already told us, but we were shocked at the end. I'm not shocked. It's just, it ends.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
like, what happened? Like, tell us about that decision to kind of end it on this sort of open ending where you don't know what happens next to her. You don't know what happens to these flyers that she's saved. You don't know what happens to Nadine. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I just, I felt like wanted to end it on an up note and a little bit bittersweet. And it just felt like the right place. And I know there was some questions, and a few people have asked, like, I thought John was going to come back at the end and he didn't. And I'm like, yeah,
all
because
thought he was gonna be. We're like, because he's just missing, right? Like,
I know.
he isn't dead. And then we're
And
like,
I
wait.
thought about that and I was like, that would have been a bridge too far, because it was a
And that
real,
didn't
like,
happen.
yeah, biographical fiction. That's not what happened. And I just didn't feel, yeah.
I think I love that you made that distinction though, historical fiction versus biographical fiction. So you chose to keep this true to, as true as you could to her real story versus veering more into, entertainment factor fiction.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was like I said, it's super challenging and a little bit scary, but yeah, I wanted to do that. I'm seeing a couple questions. I want to know more about Jean. Yeah, John, like we have not been able to find one photo of him, and he was like a rising political star, and then he joined the resistance, obviously.
Oh.
I still I have not been able to find, and not that much in history, which is interesting too. Like I don't know, there's more to Jean's
And yet
story.
he was a leader.
He was a leader, yeah, he really was, and kind of like I said, a rising star politically in France, but then joined the resistance and was a rising star in that as well. You know, friends with de Gaulle, the whole thing. And so that was interesting. Oh, you say, I don't know. I'm shocked, but she left her child with the first husband. Did she have any contact or connection? So she did not. And that was shocking to me too. And I thought about, I actually, in the first kind of draft, I included that aspect. But the fact is, I didn't have enough information about that relationship with the son and what happened there to make it authentic. I just didn't have enough. And it brings up so many questions, right? Like it's kind of a character thing too. Like what's wrong?
And that's crazy for that era. I mean, you might see that now, but for that era, women did not just abandon their children.
They didn't. And I'm like, I don't know what happened there. I don't know enough. And I just couldn't go down that path because I didn't have enough data. And so I took that out because I had one scene where Dorothy Thompson admits that she left her child behind too. And so they both kind of bonded over that. But then you have to pull that thread, right? You start talking about a son, like you can't just like drop a son and never talk about him again. So, and I just didn't know enough about that relationship until I've talked to Tracy and David. Yeah.
And so did her grandchildren have any knowledge of that history?
Yes, they did. So Dave, like their whole family tree and history is like a movie or story unto itself, but it's like too convoluted to get into. But David was adopted, so never knew Drew. But Tracy knew Drew, and Tracy's dad, Ellis, was the abandoned son. And so Ellis and Drew were estranged for a long time, and he held a lot of bitterness, obviously. Of course he would. Somewhere after the war, they reconciled enough that they had a relationship, and Tracy had a relationship with Drew. But she described it as, this could just be Drew. I think also she just had a hard time. She went through a lot during the war, so Tracy said she was very generous. She was very financially generous to us. I visited her in France a number of times, but she was hard to get close to emotionally. And I think also the first,
you do hear about that with that generation and that time.
Yeah,
I think she had when there's war, what you've seen, you build a wall.
You build a wall. I also think the first marriage, I think there might have been some abuse there or something, like was not good. But then, Ellis was left in this not good situation. I don't know. That's what I know about that.
Yeah. All right, Missy, can I unmute you? Because I know you have a question I want to make sure you get to ask before I accidentally ask it. Well, I know once I get chatty, I just take over.
Well, with the great presentation, and the questions, a lot of my thoughts have come up. So what I'm going to ask is, we always talk about, our Google rabbit hole and, authors and readers and reviewers, you're always stumbling across things. So you said you came across Drew researching The Secret Stealers. So in doing this book, did you come across anything that you're like, I need to think about that for a future book, or I'm going to file this away, or just anything that was just like, that's interesting?
Yeah, not as much as with The Secret Stealers. This, like that zoo story, just like I couldn't let it go because it was so bananas, and no pun intended with the monkey house.
No bananas, like you did there.
No, I didn't mean to do that. So, but I will say, I feel like Dorothy Thompson deserves her own thing, and that would be probably like, she had a fascinating life, but particularly like right after World War I, up to leading up to World War II. She was amazing. Yeah,
I would like to look at a female journalist for sure.
Yeah, she married Sinclair Lewis, who was a famous playwright, famous writer. Yeah, she had multiple husbands, and again a son that she left behind, and she was fascinating. Oh, she also had a woman she was in love with, and I think in Berlin. Yeah, like just lots going on.
So much there.
So much there with
And then
Dorothy.
that's a little bit of a different time period, between World War I and World War II. So that give you a different time to dig into. So I like it.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it too. I will say though, this was and I'll share like a side story that I haven't shared with many people. This was a biographical fiction kicked my butt. This was a really hard book to write. I think I need a break from biographical fiction, honestly. And one of the reasons why is because when the copy editors and lawyers were going through the draft, before I had gotten in contact with Tracy, I'd contacted David at that point, the grandson. They were going through the draft, and because she was kind of famous adjacent, like she was famous at the time, but she's not like Cary Grant and Greta Garbo famous. So not everything is in the public domain about her. So she was kind of hard to research. And where the autobiography was a major primary source for me, I had to get blanket permission from the estate to legally, they had to sign off on it. I had to hire an entertainment lawyer.
Oh,
and
wow.
And if Tracy hadn't signed it, like they probably would have pulled the book. And I didn't know her. I didn't know what she was going to do. I didn't know if she was going to ask me to pay thousands and thousands of dollars. Like it was really, really stressful. Like
so that adds a whole other layer to a book.
Yeah, a whole other layer. Thankfully, she
I didn't know that. I thought once somebody was deceased, that kind of changed things. But
and it does. This is the other detail that's why I had to do this. So I thought the book, you can find the whole autobiography online for free anywhere. And it was out of print in 1947. So I thought it was in the public domain.
Right.
But then someone I had to go through like, the copyright government records online, and someone had renewed the copyright in 1976, which means it's still under copyright.
Oh, like, do you think they were going to make a movie or something, or?
Yes. So her friend, one of her friends in 1976 renewed it because they thought they were going to make a movie. And so it's still, that autobiography is still under copyright, which is why I had to get permission.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah,
I know. A whole other layer.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. That's kind of a convoluted story, but when I tell you, like, I didn't sleep for like the month of August last year, it was so awful.
Because I wrote this one pretty fast too, because it doesn't feel like that long ago that The Secret Stealers was out. So it feels pretty fast.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like I don't write fast. Like I see like Kate Quinn and some of these authors cranking out a book a year. Like I feel like every other year is like the fastest I can do, because it's
a year of research. And just the research alone is a year, right? I mean,
oh yeah, it's so much work. I can't, and I'm already like feeling the pressure to like have another project, and I'm not there yet.
No, just enjoy this one for now.
Thank you.
The other thing we thought was crazy, because the zoo scene, I will say, that's nuts. Like, that is crazy. And you're reading it going, that can't really be happening. But the other thing that blew our mind, and we want to know more about, was this whole faking cancer. And she literally like poisoned herself and was bleeding out.
Yeah. Oh, that was crazy.
Tell us all about that.
Yeah, I was reading. Yeah, that's all.
I've never heard of that. And I've read all kinds of concentration camp books and books on the war, and I'd never once heard of anyone faking cancer.
Yeah, that was nuts. And I go into a pretty good amount of detail in the book, but she goes into even more detail in the autobiography. And I'm like, and people, her doctor was like, you are going to die. Like, you need to stop taking these drugs. Are you going to die from the drugs? Never mind.
She was really bleeding. It wasn't like fake bleeding. It's not like she was killing a chicken and faking that she was bleeding. She was bleeding.
Oh, she was. And then at the end, she stopped taking them. And so they did actually put like fake blood and stuff in her bed to like make them think she was still bleeding. Yeah.
That cannot be good for your body.
No, she was in really rough shape. Like, she could barely walk the first few weeks she was home in Barbizon. Like, she was really in rough shape.
And how long did this go on for?
A couple months. I'd have to look back, but yeah, she in the camp, she she played it for a while, and to the point that she was like lost weight. She was, and it was, she said it was hard because her friends thought she was dying. Like her friends in the camp thought she was dying, and she couldn't even
Right.
tell them what she was
Well, and
doing.
one of the things, I think it might have been Shanna, excuse me if I quote you incorrectly, but she said, like, she noticed in the book you said that the Nazis, were afraid of three things, and one of the things was cancer. So that was a thing?
Yeah, cancer was, they like, that freaked them out, which
So
I
that
thought
would
was,
be a reason for them to dismiss you.
yeah, that totally freaked them out.
Wow. So how many
Yeah.
people got out? Like, are there other stories other than hers of people, using that fake excuse to get out of being imprisoned?
No, I haven't heard of that, but like they used all sorts of things, including like, dressing as a nun and going out with a bunch of nuns and like things
That
like
was
that.
also crazy.
Yeah. All sorts
Plan
of,
is to dress as this nun.
yeah. And then some of them, it was just bribery. You know what I mean? Like they just friends and family would come up with money to get them out, stuff like that.
I was just wondering, you mentioned a little bit about the tighter parameters when it's biographical fiction, but how hard was it to find that balance between staying true to their stories, but also adding your own spin on it?
Yeah, I think that like walking that line thank you for the question, was really hard. And because at the end of the day, like, yes, it's biographical, but it's fiction and it's a story, and it has to have a beginning and middle of it and an end, and it has to be entertaining. And, you have to care about these characters. And so yeah, that was a hard balancing act. And that's also why like the author's notes in the back are so long. And I started writing those as I was writing the story, which I'd never done before. Because I wanted to make sure that people knew that like this is fiction and here's where I took liberties. It's based on a woman, it's inspired by her life. That's what my editors you have to say it's inspired by her life, because it's not her life story. Yeah.
That was a good balance.
Yeah, thank you.
Marty, you have a question about The American, right?
I do. So, Jane, thank you. It was a great book. We enjoyed it.
Thank
we
you.
had a great discussion. So, in our discussion, we were talking about it was very unusual for us with the American Nazi. So, he had been in America, then he goes to serve. So, that was none of us had heard of anything like that.
Yeah, and I hadn't either. And he was in her autobiography, and she kind of struck up a little friendship with him. He was, I obviously like expanded on that relationship quite a bit, but I thought it was so interesting. Like, I don't know if he had to go home because of his family or how he ended up going home, but he went home and had to serve. And it was like clear, like he was like talking to all these American women, like, you are all crazy. Like, why are you still here? Like, you could leave. I want to leave. I don't even want to be here. Why didn't you leave when you could? And now you're stuck in this prison. Like, and so I thought, like, just so interesting to have someone who loved America and Americans and but had to serve with the German army. And I thought, well, if she needs an ally in the camp, of course it has to be someone like him. So
that was fascinating. We'd never heard of that before.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah, that was really interesting. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, like, he never mentioned why he had to leave Yonkers and go in the candy factory and go back to Germany, but it must have been some sort of obligation. Oh, that's going to come back. Okay, good.
You're up next.
I had a lot of questions.
I know. I was like, I got to make sure I call on Pam because
I remember. At the age, I have to forget completely. But I was curious now about Nadine, since you've answered all my other questions. Like, what happened to her? Did you get her happily ever after with the airman?
That's another one. Like, after there's a picture of her in the autobiography. She's mentioned many times in Drew's letters because they were so close. Mm-hmm. And there's multiple pictures in the autobiography, and then that's it. Like, I tried to find what happened to Nadine. Like, she doesn't mention her on the tour or in any of those articles, like, because I love Nadine as a character. And their love of Gone with the Wind was
great.
Real. They loved it. And Jane Austen, and that, everyone a lot of women in France were reading Gone with the Wind because it had just been translated, and they really connected with these women in the, you know, during wartime.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, and you know, it was hinted at that she had a favorite of the aviators that were living with them at the end of the war. Drew never mentioned a romance, but of course, like, romance is always fun, so I had to put that in. Thank you.
I want to know, I did not listen to the audio, but there were some people that listened to the audio. So tell me about how that all works for you. Like, do you get to choose who narrates or who doesn't, or?
Well, first, who listened to the audio? I'm curious.
I didn't love it, in all
Interesting.
honesty.
Okay.
I wanted more than one voice. And unfortunately, a lot, like when she goes, like even when she does Nadine's voice, it sounded like Minnie Mouse. It was annoying.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So that narrators are hard, right?
Yeah. That's why we were curious, because I've heard that like some authors stick to like a narrator that they like that feels like gets them. And so I was so curious if you had any choice in this.
So I picked a new one a new narrator for this one. Christina Klebe is her name, and she speaks French and German fluently. And that was really why I went with her, because you know, I'm not in the top tier of my publisher for them to pick, like, to hire multiple narrators, frankly. Right. So I knew it was only going to be one. So I wanted someone who got the accents right.
Okay, that makes sense too, because one of the critiques that this other gal, Kara, who's not on here, was saying that she struggled with the like Southern accents. But of course, obviously, if she's speaking French and German, maybe Southern American is not her.
Yeah, I think it's just super hard. I mean, I've gotten to know Christina. I didn't know, I only vaguely know my other narrators, and she, I mean, when I tell you, she put her heart and soul into this. And so I've heard some great reviews about her and some not so good reviews. And I just think that it's just a hard thing, especially.
I loved her when she was Drew. I mean,
yeah, I thought she really captured that.
Drew.
And frankly, I can't listen to it because it freaks me out. So I can't, like.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, I haven't listened.
Is it just weird for you to hear your characters like alive?
I like run screaming from the room. I can't even deal. It's so weird. I don't know.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So Charlie, my husband, and my daughter have listened to some of it, and they thought it was good so far, what they've listened to so far. But
well,
yeah,
I think nailing Drew is probably the most important one, right? If she's the main voice and she does a good job with that, then that's the voice.
And if you look her up,
beautiful.
What's that?
The French accent was beautiful.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah, and if you look her up, ChristinaKlebe.com, I think is her website. She looks like Drew, which is really weird too. Like in a couple of she's an actress and a voice, voiceover actress and stuff. And she's interesting.
I really liked the audiobook. I felt like I did better with the audiobook than reading it by itself, like me personally reading it, just because of the French language. Like there's so much of French that like I don't know how they pronounce that. And
great point too, though, about how she spoke the words, because it does seem like there's a theme with audiobooks that when there's, you know, a language barrier or words we don't know, it's so nice to have the audio so you can hear it pronounced correctly.
Yeah, that's true. And thank you for that feedback.
For sure. I also want to know about the dog because she really had this dog.
She really had on D.
Which also seems crazy to me in the middle of a war when you hear about people like with rations and not having enough food and not, you know.
I know.
You had this dog.
Yeah, and they love that dog. She's obviously a big dog lover. You saw her Great Dane too. Yeah. So yeah, and you know, her and Nadine were obsessed with the dog, and then the Flyers that stayed in the house were obsessed with the dog. He was a big poodle. Yeah.
So she would travel with him all the way from Paris to now we know it's 90 minutes away on a train with this big dog.
With a big ass dog. I know. It's so funny.
That also seems crazy. Again, there's so many times in this story where I was like, that couldn't have happened. Really?
Yeah. I was surprised too. Yeah. So yeah, so funny. But yeah, still a lot of pets around, and despite the rationing.
So I had a question. I loved how she was able to sort of kind of flip in and be in favor with the Germans, and because of her looks. And so I was curious how you walked that line with, you know, how the Germans felt and why they included her and kind of let her off the hook so many times, and kind of walked that line of like the bigotry. And I'm just curious how you kind of made those decisions.
Yeah, I think that she was very confident in her looks. I will tell you that, and I think that probably came through. And she definitely had that Aryan. I mean, you saw the pictures of her from her Hollywood days, that kind of Aryan blonde look, and knew that that was kind of a tool that she could use, and when she was in trouble. And really, I kind of just took the lead from her letters and her autobiography, and also because some of those scenes, like when they're trying to transport the guy who's injured in basically a trunk, and she has to sit on it, and like some of that's a real scene from her life. Like she actually had to do that and kind of like flirt with the Germans so she could hide this guy and get him to safety. So so yeah, I kind of just took her cues, and
I love how much of this is actually like real.
yeah, a lot of it it's like kind of like, I feel like the letters and the book, the autobiography, kind of gave me an outline, and then I kind of had to fill in the scenes and people and composites of characters and different things like that. It kind of gave me a broad brush view of things. And then one thing I will say, I'll share, because I think people like this kind of detail. She was also, because the expatriate community in Paris was pretty close. Like a lot of people, they all socialized with each other, Americans and British. There wasn't that many of them during the war. And she was actually socialized quite a bit with Wallace Simpson and Edward. And so they were originally in the story.
Oh.
And because Wallace was kind of chummy with the Nazis. And I wanted to kind of play that up, and I wanted Wallace to be kind of like, you weren't sure you could trust her. Was she going to rat Drew out? But it was kind of a red herring that didn't fit with the narrative enough to include it, because they're such big characters from history. I just couldn't just like plop them in there and then take them out, so
yeah.
So that ended up on the cutting room floor. But I thought, I mean, reading this, when I first read one of her letters, and I'm like, wait, Wallace Simpson, what? What is going on? Yeah.
I loved the inclusion of the letters. I thought that was a brilliant way to flow the story along, and keep Jacques in the story for a while, and her family, and just the United States, what's going on back there and stuff. So
yeah. Oh, I did mention them. That's right. Oh, very good, Pam. Thank you. They were at the villa with Charles. Yeah, the Bedeaus. Yeah, I did mention them, but they had some walk-on roles before. I had to cut them.
They had scenes that were cut.
Yeah.
Well, I love this story. We all did. I think this was such a perfect book to read too during Women's History Month. I thought it was so special. Like, did you intentionally want it to be launched this month, or was that not up to you?
No, I mean, it launched the day before International Women's Day, and I mean,
you couldn't ask for more, because it really is a woman, a real life woman in history. It's really her story, and it's mind blowing. I mean, it's a story where one of the things we talked about was how different our view of history would be if we'd had these stories as girls. Growing up, we didn't hear these kinds of stories. I'm so thankful these stories exist now. But how many other women are out there that we don't even know about yet?
I know. It is. I mean, you think you'd heard all the World War II stories at this point, because there's fiction and nonfiction, and yet there's still more. So yeah. And so, but thank you all so much for reading. It's like means everything, especially during launch month. It's so nerve-wracking. I really appreciate all the kind words and reading it and the questions.
It's so fun. I'm so excited for you. So what is next for you? What's the rest of you? Look like you've been really busy with your launch, so that's good.
It is good. Yeah. The next, like from now until June, things, I've got a lot going on for this, but I'm also, I'm hoping to get another proposal into my editors before the summer, but we'll see. Like I have a couple like very vague ideas, and I'm superstitious, so I can't share.
Right, you can't tell us. Can you generically say, like, if you could write about, is there like a certain era you really want to write about, or is there a certain like place you haven't written about that would be fun to write about someday?
So I will say, like, I think I need a break from World War II, just because I've been there for a long time, and I just need, I think also it's you stretch yourself when you work on different historical periods, and you got to push yourself sometimes. So yeah.
So you can't tell us what's next, but you
I
can tell us
can't.
there's something next.
There is
For
something.
those people that want to meet you, are you doing any book signings? Is there like a place where they can find your schedule?
Yeah, on my janehealey.com, on my events page. And I'll be doing more virtual stuff as well.
Yep.
There's a local bookstore that has signed copies available through bookshop.org. They're called Bookends in Winchester, Massachusetts.
Fantastic. We will give them a shout out.
They're
Bookends.
awesome. Bookends in Winchester, Mass. I'll text you about her info too, but they're
cool. I'll be sure to give her a little shout out.
These two girls, and they used to work at Barnes and Noble together, and they left, and this shop came up for sale, and they're just crushing it. I'm so proud of them. Yeah, it's
That
awesome.
is really cool.
So they have they have signed copies, and then I'm going to be mostly New England. My publisher doesn't pay for national tours, so but I'm going to be in like Greenwich, Connecticut, and the Berkshires, Mass, and
Ooh, I'll have to see when that is, because I'm going to Connecticut here for a wedding. I'll have to see if I can find you.
Yes, yeah. So
Be
it's
on the
all
East Coast in June too. So I'd love to know your June dates where you're going to
yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Most of it is updated on my events page, but I mean, you can find me anywhere. Just shoot me a message. Leighellen knows, like,
It's great. It's so nice when an author is active though, because it's not necessarily an author's gift to update social media.
Yeah, and it's hard, but right now I'm definitely more active than normal because of everything.
Jane, this was awesome. Your presentation was amazing, and exactly, we are all historical fiction nerds, so that was
I love it.
fabulous. So thank you so much for your time, and I just wish you all the best. I'm so excited that we got to have you on again, because I love Secret Stealers and I love your writing. I feel like you're everything I love about historical fiction, because you find these incredible women and then you share them with us, and it stays, pretty true to history, and I love that. So thank you for sharing her story with us.
And thank you for all your support, Leighellen. I'm so grateful to all of you. Thank you for reading and all your amazing questions and kind words. Thank you.
We will shout this from the rooftops for you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your time, and have a great evening.
You too. Take care.
Thanks everybody for hopping on. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for joining us. I love these discussion author chats are always my favorite, and I hope that you will join us this next month. Book Friends Book Club will be announcing their picks in just 3 days, and we have author chats already scheduled, so I can't wait to read with you again. See you soon.